and welcome to the KnitandGrace podcast. This is episode 20. Welcome back if you're a returning viewer. If you are new here, my name is Mia and I am the maker behind KnitandGrace. And today we have the monthly podcast episode where I go over everything that I finished since the last episode, what I'm currently working on, and my making plans for the upcoming month or so. So if this sounds like something that interests you, settle down with a couple of something cool these days, I feel like, at least if you're in the US and our never-ending heat waves, and you're knitting, and we will get settled right in. So today's episode will probably be a little chaotic, as you all have grown to hopefully love out of my episodes. It is the Saturday before this episode goes live. As you all know, I usually like to film during the week so that no one is home, but everyone is home. We are also getting ready to go out for flock, so there's a lot of activity and a lot of craziness going on, and because of that there was actually a little bit of a flurry to finish some items. So I think like all of the FOs that I have to show you all today, none of them have been blocked. So this is gonna be an FO parade. None of it has been blocked, and then I will likely put in a little bit kind of a looking back segment in the next month's podcast so that you all can see what everything looks like finally blocked and worn and all of that kind of stuff. So I have done that a couple of times in the past, but I think that this is definitely going to be one of those instances when I have to do that this month. But all of that aside, I guess we will jump right in with what I'm wearing today. And today I am wearing the Slightly Sassy V by Aimee Sher. And so this is a project that I featured as a finished object in last month's podcast. So if you haven't caught that episode, I'll go ahead and link it up above for you so that you can go ahead and watch that. But I think I featured this in last month's episode. It was blocked, it was fully finished. However, I didn't have FO pictures for you all, so I'll go ahead and insert those here. As you all know, I like to show what items look like on a worn body, especially since I do have a mid-sized to larger body. So I always like to have people know what these patterns look like on a person. And so I will give you a few details on the project, but I won't go into tons of details just because, again, I did go over it in depth in last month's podcast. But again, this is the Slightly Sassy V by Aimee Sher. I knit this in Wool Dreamers Sauna, which is a 50-50 wool cotton blend, and it is in the color Grown. And I knit size D, or the 4th size, which is my usual Aimee Sher Makes size, and that corresponds to an upper bust of 40.75. And as always, I included cup size 2, which gives you a 2-inch bust dart, giving you an extra 2 inches of fabric across the front. So yeah, in terms of all of my other modifications that I made, shortening, lengthening, all of that, actually both with this particular project, I lengthened in some areas, shortened in others. You can go ahead and check out that episode that I put out last month. So going ahead and jumping right in to finished objects, I have 4 finished objects to share with you all. 2 summer projects and 2 fall projects. And yeah, I'm really excited to share them with you all. The first one I'm going to share is actually the first one that I finished, and this is a project that I cast on very last minute because I think if you watched last month's episode, you will notice I'm not really in the summer knitting mood this year for some reason. I knit this top. I was working on the Avani, which I will show you shortly. And other than that, I've really been casting on a lot of fall projects. I think that it's just been so hot this year that I am not really drawn to wear a lot of my summer knits. And I do have quite a few summer knits that I knit last year. I actually went on a little bit of a summer knitting frenzy last year. So yeah, so not too much summer knitting going on, but I kind of had a vision for the outfit that I wanted to wear at Flock. And so I decided to cast this project on last minute, and I am so happy with how it turned out. And I can't wait to show you all how that turned out, you know, once I'm at Flock and I'm able to take pictures and all of that jazz. But all of that to say, my first finished project is the Ulan Tank by Aimee Sher again. You're going to notice that I have quite a few Aimee Sher patterns this month. And this is what it looks like back here. And then I'll go ahead and bring it up closer to the camera so you all can see that beautiful lace detail in this tank. And so, yeah, this is absolutely stunning. I am really excited, and I'm going to be wearing this at Flock, so this will be my official Flock project. So I'll go ahead and put it down so that I don't go crazy with my holding up my hands. But again, this is fully finished. All my ends are woven in and everything. I just need to block it. I'm trying to decide whether or not I'm going to do a full wet block or I'm just going to do a steam block. I'm leaning more toward the steam block for this one because it actually doesn't look too bad. And with cotton, if you've ever worked with a 100% plant-based fiber, you know that when it's wet, it does stretch quite a bit. So I actually like how it fits exactly right now. So I think I just might pin it out a little bit so that the lace relaxes a bit and then give it a good steam with my steamer when it comes to blocking it. But in terms of the yarn that I use, and again, if I'm looking down, I'm just looking at my notes. As usual, I knit this in yarn that I had in stash, which was Woolly Knit 4-ply cotton. It is a 100% unmercerized cotton, and the color is called Mustard. And I knit this on US 4 or 3.5 millimeter needles. That is going to be, and sorry for the road noise in the background, hopefully I can edit that out in post-production, but the US 4 3.5 millimeter needle is going to be the MVP of this episode. I think that I've really gotten into a groove when it comes to knitting with size 4 needles. Don't know why, but it is what it is. So for this project, I did knit my standard ASM size, which is the size D, again corresponding to a 40.75 inch upper bust with that 2-inch cup. In terms of this pattern, to give you a little bit of a breakdown of how it works, and I will actually say I didn't make any modifications to the pattern. So I worked everything exactly as written in terms of the lengths. So I didn't actually shorten this, and obviously I just added in the cup, but that's an optional modification to the pattern. So just so you all know how the pattern is knit up, if you ever do cast this on, it's actually cast on from the bottom up, and then you work it in one piece from the bottom all the way up in the round. Then you separate, you knit your fronts, and then you knit your back. There's a 3 needle bind off at the shoulder, and then you pick up for the 1x1 rib. It's a half twisted rib, both along the armholes and the hem. And then along the neckline, you pick up and you do a I-cord edging along the neck. So I absolutely love the details of this tank. I think everything was like so thoughtfully thought out, as with many of Aimee's patterns in terms of the fit. And I'm really excited to show you all this pattern worn in the vlog that I'll be putting out for you all for my flock trip. Okay, so the next pattern that I have to share with you all is a repeat, and it is the Avani shirt by Caidree. So I did feature this in last month's podcast as a whip, and now we have it fully finished. This is a little longer, so let's see if I can, yeah, there we go. So I have it fully finished. This one is fully finished. Most of the ends have been woven in, with the exception of the bottom edging ends. So that's what this looks like. And I'll go ahead and bring it up just a little bit closer to the camera so you all can see the V-neck there. And yeah, so let's see what to tell you about this one. This was another one that I knit up on US 4 or 3.5mm needles. And for this one, I used Sandnes Garn, a tin Lena, in the color 4335, which is called Raspberry Cream. For this one, it's actually, I used exactly 3 balls of tin Lena. So as always, I'll be linking my Ravelry project pages below. I haven't been 100% amazing about keeping them up to date, so you might have to check back at a later time in case all of the details aren't on there. But I will let you all know, like, based on the weight that I used for the project, it does say, because it was like just a little bit over 150 grams, and this comes in 50-gram balls, but some of the balls were a little bit over 50, and I think one of the balls was a little under 50, so it ended up being exactly 3 balls of the tin Lena. In terms of the sizing, I chose the 5th size, which corresponds to a 45-inch finished bust, and I did add in my own modification of adding in a bust start. So I did add in a 2-inch bust start, and this is another one that I think I'm going to steam as opposed to wet block, because this actually I can already feel is pretty heavy. So in addition to the bust start, which is not a modification that's in the pattern, I just, know how to add that in. The edgings, and so I guess I should talk about how it's knit up. You actually, this one is knit top down. So you start with the back and then you pick up the fronts, you join in the round, and then you work the body down. There are I-cord edgings at the V-neck as well as the armholes, and also an I-cord edging at the bottom. So it gives it a really sleek and classy like blouse look, which I absolutely love, and was what I was looking for. So yeah, so I'm gonna put this down and kind of walk through my modifications that I made for this one, and kind of maybe what I would do next time if I knit it again, which I think I will, because I really like how it looks. So again, I added in that 2-inch bust start just to give me a little bit of extra room in the front, because I am working with less ease, in this case a little bit of negative ease. So that gives me the extra fabric that I need to be fully covered. I did shorten the body slightly, although not much. I think about an inch or two before I did my I-cord bind off. And that was both because of my own body and the fact that I usually have to shorten the body on things, but also because I was coming up to the end of that third ball and I didn't want to actually crack into my fourth ball that I already had. So I actually think I knit this even like a half an inch shorter than I originally intended to knit it. And then the other modification that I made that I think will determine the size that I choose next time. I think next time I might go for the size 4 for the top and then increase the amount that I need across the bust once I join in the round. And the reason for that is that I found the V-neck and the armholes to be very, very deep for my size. And I think also part of that has to do with the fact that I'm very petite, but just in general, I was just like looking at the armhole. Actually, if we look at the armhole depth of both of these side by side, or I guess it's not terribly different, but you can see, actually it is. So you can see that the Avani has, what is that, almost like 1.5 to 2 inch deeper armhole. And so what I did actually, and so the armhole depth that I'm showing you is actually even less than what it would be in the pattern, because I actually picked up at a less stitches around the armhole and the V-neck to make sure that I maintain my modesty and I was able to just wear it comfortably without having like my bra showing or too much cleavage or anything like that. So one thing about the pattern is that around both the armhole and the neck, the pattern tells you to pick up a 1-to-1 ratio, and I did a 2-to-3 ratio to make sure that everything fit me well. And it actually fits me really well. I'm really excited to be able to wear this. This is definitely one that I'll be able to wear to the office. So I'm really excited about that. Just a very classic blousey look. And I think that's really everything that I have to share with you all. I gave you the needles, the yarn, the size, my modifications. And yeah, I'm really happy to get around to steaming this so that I can start wearing it to the office and out and about, and also take some FO pictures to share with you all in the next podcast. So the next 2 finished projects that I have to show you all is actually the same pattern, and I have finished it twice. And yeah, and this is a test knit. So I am going to show you all again, both of these are not blocked. And I'm going to give you very basic information about the pattern and also my specific makes. And I'm going to hold off on giving you the in detail information until the pattern is released. I will release an actual pattern spotlight episode for this top. And so the top that I'm talking about is the Hibernate Pullover by Aimee Sher, and it is the fall winter sibling to the Slightly Sassy V. So I knit this one twice in 2 different yarns. One I had in stash that I had actually bought during Pearl Soho's, was it their Black Friday sale? I think it was the Black Friday sale, because I knew that Aimee was going to be releasing this pattern this year. They gave me a sneak peek, which is the nice thing about being friends with designers. So I have been stalking them for months and months and months while they got this pattern ready and trying not to be annoying so that they didn't feel pressured. And when the test call finally went up, I was like, obviously I'm gonna make this, please let me in. And they let me into the test call, and so that's kind of why I made it twice. So I kind of already had yarn in stash for it, and then I fell in love with a different yarn option as well that I wanted to show you all. So the pattern is going to be called the Hibernate Pullover. And again, this is by Aimee, Sher, and it is currently in testing. And I will release a pattern specific project spotlight once it is released, so you all will know when it's out live in the world. And this is my first version. Let's see. And yeah. So this is my first version that I have of the pattern. And I'll go in a little bit. There you go. So you can see the V neckline and the raglan shaping. And so yeah, so I'll give you a quick rundown of the pattern. And again, I'll do a full pattern spotlight episode. But this is going to be a top-down raglan V-neck pullover, as you all can see. So it is knit in the round, top down, in one piece. And it calls for sport to DK weight yarn. And so this first version that I knit in Pearl Soho Goodwool. The color is called Olive Oil. And this is going to be sort of an example to you all how the yarn that you're using really dictates the needles and how you're going to get gauge. So the pattern is written for a US 6 needle. I had to size up to a US 7 to get gauge on this one because the pattern is written for a light fingering and a mohair held together, and I used a sport weight held single. So obviously this is going to be a little bit of a lighter yarn, so I had to size up a needle, and it does create this really nice airy fabric. However, it is fully opaque, so there's nothing that is, you know, going to be able to see through when I'm wearing it, but it does create a really nice airy fabric, which I think is going to be perfect for fall. And so yeah, so again, for this one, I am knitting size D, which is my usual Aimee Sher makes size, with a cup size 2. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that, and you know, leave all of the details in terms of all of my modifications that I made for the project spotlight episode. But with that, I'll show you my fourth finished object of the episode, which is my second version of the pattern. And this is that second version here. Let's see. Yeah. So this is that second version here. And this one I made because when they released the pattern, part of the testing process, there is a discount code as partial yarn support for any yarn that you purchase either from their shop or from the recommended yarn company's shop. And you know, so I was like looking through their shop, even though I knew I already had yarn in stash, because I was like, well, you know, let's support Aimee and everything that they do. Love everything that they do. I also wanted to order more tea. If I'm completely honest, I was like, I need to order more tea. I don't want to pay shipping just for tea. And let me see what's in the shop and figure out if I want to buy something or not. And I ultimately fell in love with this color, and I couldn't not buy it. So this color is Plum Rose by Knitting for Olive. And so for this second version of the project, I am using Knitting for Olive Merino held double with soft silk mohair, again, both in the color Plum Rose. And so again, this is kind of where, you know, your gauge and the yarn that you're using definitely goes into play. I actually needed to size down a needle size from the recommended needles for the pattern to a US 5 or 3.75 millimeter needle, because I think that the mohair, the merino is just a slightly bit thicker, and it actually bloomed a lot. And so when I made my gauge swatch with a US 6, and this is another kind of tip, is you should always wash your swatch I made my gauge swatch with the US 6, and I actually got gauge pre-blocking. And then when I blocked it, it actually bloomed beyond the gauge that I needed for the pattern. So obviously I knew that if I knit it at a US 6 and I followed the pattern for my size, which is again that size D with a 2-inch bust dart, that it would be too big, because ultimately the fabric would bloom and then ultimately I would end up with a project that's too big. So yeah, so that's kind of everything for this one. Again, it's the Hibernate pullover, which is currently in testing for Aimee Sher. I used KFO, merino, and soft silk held together in the color plum rose on a US 5 or 3.75 millimeter needles. And again, making my regular size D with a 2-inch cup. So I will go ahead and set these aside for now, and I am really excited to be able to show a little bit more details of the pattern and kind of the modifications that I made on my 2 versions once I release that project spotlight episode. So moving right along to the works in progress, I have 2 works in progress to share with you all today, and they are repeat offenders. So they have both been featured in last month's episode. So the first work in progress that I have to show you all is my progress on the book club cardigan by Sari Nordlund. And so this is what it's looking like so far. And I am absolutely loving this. So I believe that last time that I showed this on the podcast, I had just joined in the round and maybe worked like about an inch or 2. And so since the last podcast, I knit the 3rd ball of Wool Dreamers Moda. So that's the yarn that I'm using for this, and knit down the body. And so part of that did bring me to the setup of the pockets. So the cardigan is going to have pockets. So that's kind of that black yarn that you see here. And yeah, I'm just about done with the body on this one. So this is just 3 balls of Moda, has taken me through the majority of the body. So I will not even need the full 4th ball to finish the body. And I'm thinking the 4th ball can probably get me the body as well as the button band. So we'll see how that works out. But again, I won't go into too much detail. I'd like to go into a little bit more detail once the project is finished and I've actually completed all my mods. But I am knitting this one in Moda in the color 246. There are no names for the Wool Dreamers Moda colors. Or at least as far as I know. So if they do come out with names, I'll go ahead and correct myself. But I am using US 6 needles, which are the recommended needle size for the project, which is 4 millimeter needles. And I am knitting the 5th size, which corresponds to a finished bust measurement of 53.25 inches, which will give me about 8 inches of positive ease around the bust. So far I haven't made any modifications to the pattern. I'm not actually planning on making any modifications to the body length, because the pattern is actually does have a little bit of a cropped body, at least the way it looks on Sari anyway. So for me, the length that you are recommended to knit to will actually give me a full length body, which is what I'm looking for. However, I will likely have to shorten the sleeves, so I can definitely give you more details as I continue to work through that project. And so the second work in progress that I have to share with you all again is a repeat, and again is another cardigan, as I am hitting the cardigans really strong this year despite all the purling, although sometimes my wrist does not like me. It is the Caidree pullover by Bear Knit. And this is one that's a little bit hard to show because it's kind of all like rolled in on itself. And so I do plan on actually, now that I finished the body, I want to say that I had finished probably half of the body length last time. Now that I've actually finished the body, I do plan on giving this a steam block so that I can go ahead and pick up the button band and then knit the sleeves. So I will do the button band first and then the sleeves, which is the way that I like to do knit cardigans, because I find that I like to sort of see how it's going to fit buttoned up to determine the sleeve length. And so this will get a nice steam before I do either of those steps. In terms of the yarn that I'm using for this, this is again yarn that I had in stash. So I think all of this yarn is yarn that I had in stash or very recent purchases. But this is the Woolly Knit British Wool 4-ply. So this is the fingering weight, and the main color I'm using is the color Harvest, and the contrast color is the color Jet Black, which you all have seen me use the Jet Black now. This is the third project that I'm using that black in. The first project was an Oslo hat that I made for my mom. The second project was my April cardigan that you all saw recently. And then this is the third project that I'm actually knitting a woolly knit cone into. And that's actually something that I've been thinking about recently, because I think both times that I have gotten woolly knit cones, I've gotten 3 cones each time. And I was thinking like maybe I might do some type of episode in the future where once I'm done knitting with all of the cones, kind of show you all how many projects and how much I can get out of the cones. Let me know if that's something that you're interested in. If you're interested in knitting with cones in general, whether or not they're woolly knit cones or not. Most of the cones that I have are woolly knit, although I do have 2 Holst cones as well, and who knows what other cones I might pick up in the future. But I think that it's, you know, they tend to be pretty inexpensive, and you really can get a lot for your money. And it's really nice too, I think, for me, specifically with like the cottons and things and like the summer yarns, because you can pretty much knit a whole project with very minimal weaving in of ends, which whenever you're knitting with a summer yarn, you may or may not know, is pretty difficult to weave in those ends 100% without it like peeking through and stuff like that. So I just love the feeling of just being able to like knit a whole project and not have to like weave in tons of ends. So another really great reason to knit with cones. So let me know if that's something that you would be interested in the future. Again, that'd probably be a future project or episode, I should say, because I would have to kind of knit down quite a bit of my cones before being able to film that. But that wraps up all of the whips for today. I don't have any acquisitions for the month because my one and only acquisition was the KFO that I purchased for the Hibernate pullover, which at this point has been mostly fully used. I think I've used all of the mohair, and I do have one or most of the mohair. I think I used like 4.5 balls of the mohair, and then I have 1 full ball of the merino left. I had just like a little nugget of the merino left over once I bound off the body. So no acquisitions to share with you all, but I do have a Loving My Stash segment this month. Okay, after a quick battery replacement as usual, I am back. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and actually pull up my Ravelry for you all to see. As usual, I am using the Rabbit app, and so I will put that here for you all to see. But today's Loving My Stash episode, or segment I should say, is going to focus around are pattern libraries, and patterns that you might have either if you use Ravelry in your library, or patterns that you've amassed throughout the year, whether they're books or magazines, or although those aren't usually as big nowadays as they were when I first started knitting over 15 years ago, or just any kind of independently published patterns that you might have in your stash. And I think that knitting patterns, and this is something that I've talked about in general, or in the past I should say, are priced very cheaply, and I know that some designers are starting to price a little bit more competitively in terms of, or I guess price a little higher, but they still need to stay somewhat competitive with other knitwear designers who maybe don't price their patterns as high as compared to, especially like, for instance, I'm a big sewist, as many of you may know if you're a returning viewer, and sewing pattern, you can easily expect to pay anywhere between 16 to 20 US dollars for a sewing pattern, where a knitting pattern, usually for like a sweater pattern, you're looking anywhere between $6 to $10, which, there's obviously, there's still a lot of work that goes into all the grading, all of the writing up of the pattern, the, the testing process and managing the testing process, and obviously the marketing of the pattern and all of that kind of stuff. So, I think that a lot of us take the fact that knitting patterns are fairly inexpensive, at least for most of us that are knitters and use this as a hobby, because this is a very expensive hobby. We kind of take that for granted, right? That these patterns are so inexpensive. And then you add on that the fact that kind of a lot of designers will have introductory sales on their patterns. So when they're first released, they'll usually, put it down, like discount it like 10, 20, 25% when the patterns are first released. And then a lot of times also designers will have, sort of flash sales where they're even discounted even more. I think that a lot of us can really amass a big pattern library, and a library of patterns that we ultimately mean to get to, especially when you see a new design and you're really excited about it, but ultimately don't necessarily get to. And so I think that this is kind of where I'm going with this in terms of, the Loving My Stash segment in general. As you all know, in my sort of goal of less waste, using my stash, using my resources I have available, all of that I have for myself this year, this overall goal. One of the things that I've been thinking about is, the patterns that I have in my library. And also, as someone who is a pattern tester, I obviously end up getting the patterns that I'm testing, which, at least those patterns I'm actually making because I'm testing them, and then I end up getting the finished version of the pattern. But then oftentimes, depending on the designer, you always get like a pattern or 2 or 3 as, compensation of sorts for being a tester, which, is still not definitely enough compared to the effort. Like, I think testers do it because for the love of testing and the love of the designs. So really quickly, my pattern library has gotten very large, not to mention, as I mentioned before, when I first started knitting, really magazines and books were the thing. So you would have to buy an entire magazine or an entire book if you wanted 1 or 2 patterns. So you amass this really, really big library of patterns. So yeah, I think that where I'm going with all of this is really trying to make a little bit more of a conscious effort of when I see a new pattern that I like, really sitting down and again, and I've talked about this in the beginning when I kind of talked through my goals, really figuring out what it is that I like about that pattern and or that new design, right? Again, sometimes it's not even the design itself. It might be the aesthetic that the designer is selling you, or something else that has to do with the photos in general that aren't even pattern specific. But if it is a pattern that I'm drawn to, why am I drawn to that pattern? What are the elements of that pattern that I can maybe look at other patterns in my library and, you know, sort of apply that to another pattern that I have in my library and kind of get the same look and feel. And I know that this is probably a lot easier for me as an advanced knitter to do than maybe someone who's very beginner and doesn't understand, you know, kind of how to put some things together and may not be able to transpose what they're seeing in a picture to a completely different pattern. So I understand that I kind of do take that a little bit for granted. But I think that with experience, you know, and as you learn to knit and as you learn pattern construction, you can really understand how to make modifications across various patterns that you've either done in the past or just by looking at a picture visually. I think you really become adept at understanding what's going on inside the pattern and then seeing if you're able to translate that to something else. So for instance, you know, a common adjustment that I make here on my channel and, you know, in my making is adding in bust darts in patterns that don't actually call for bust darts. And so I have that knowledge in my head of how to do that. But I also have patterns in my library that more or less fit various different gauges. And a lot of the times, to be completely honest, I'm not even doing that math myself. I'm simply knitting the pattern as I would, and then kind of looking at that pattern that I'm knitting and comparing it to a pattern that I already have in my library that's a similar gauge or the same gauge, and looking at, you know, my stitch counts and then figuring out, okay, if I'm knitting this pattern that doesn't have bust darts in it and it's giving me this stitch count, what size does that correspond to in this pattern that does have bust darts? And then I kind of follow those instructions so that I'm not doing the mental math myself a lot of the time. So that is one of the advantages of having a larger library in a way. But you know, as you kind of gain these tools and things, there are ways that you can modify the patterns you already have in your library that you've already made, especially if you've already made them and you're very familiar with the pattern, to, you know, cut down on that waste, you know. And again, not necessarily that, you know, supporting a designer as a waste is definitely not, and I'm actually going to speak to that next. But, you know, if you're buying a pattern for a look, but you already have a very similar pattern in your library, you know, kind of what is the point sometimes of doing that? Like, you know, in terms of raglan pullovers, there are tons of raglan pullover patterns out there, you know, and so what is the difference between one raglan pullover that's a 24 stitch gauge versus another raglan pullover that's also a 24 stitch gauge? So again, so sometimes maybe looking at, you know, what is it about that one pullover or that one pattern that's appealing to you that's very similar to another pattern you already have, that you can transpose those elements to that pattern you already have. And I mean, I think, you know, knitting is not an inexpensive hobby. And I know that I am, you know, sort of more privileged than some in terms of the amount of disposable income that I can spend on my knitting. So I acknowledge that, but I still do try to be money conscious. You know, I still do have a budget. I still do have a finite amount of disposable income that I can spend on this craft. And sort of, you know, this is a way that I can save money, is by, you know, still making the things that I love to make and then maybe making them in a different way and using the patterns that I already have in my stash as, you know, as a guidance. And then all of this to say is that if you do love a pattern, and even if, you know, you do choose not to purchase that pattern and maybe, you know, take inspiration from that pattern and use one that's already in your library, that doesn't mean that you're not supporting that designer of that pattern, right? So you can still share their posts on social media. You can still like their projects on Ravelry. You can still, you know, just talk about their posts in general, and like maybe look at some of their other patterns that maybe don't fit something that's already in your wardrobe that you might be interested in, and maybe purchasing a different pattern. So there are still ways that you can support these designers without necessarily buying the new pattern. And then also it helps support the designer of the pattern you already have in your library, because I think that's something that we have all become kind of more aware of, is the constant pressure for designers to churn out more and more and more patterns. But also, you know, as they're putting out more patterns, sometimes, you know, their older patterns aren't being highlighted as well. So it also helps that designer of that tried and true pattern that you have in your stash of patterns or in your library of patterns. It also helps bring that pattern back into the forefront as you share and as you make these various projects. And again, this is, you know, kind of for anyone who is sharing on Instagram or sharing on Ravelry. So this is kind of social media specific, but also in general, if it's a pattern that's tried and true and you know you've made it, you know you love the fit, then, you know, you already kind of know what you're doing and you're off to the races, and it makes it that much easier for you. So I will actually, what I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and show you one example of when I actually did this, and then I will show you the next example of what I'm planning to do this with in terms of loving my stash when it comes to my yarn stash. Okay, so I will go ahead and put up my Rabbit app, which is the app that I use when I do these screen recordings right here for you all. And I have my projects, my Ravelry projects up right now. And so the project that we are going to be talking about is the Building Blocks Drop Slipover. And this is a pattern by Aimee Sher. And this is a pattern that I knit back in 2023, and I'm going to go ahead and pull up the pictures for this pattern. And so this is a pullover that is worked bottom up, and you can knit it as a pullover or as a vest, which is the view that I chose to knit in this particular version. And yeah, so the inspiration for my knitting this particular vest was actually the Highland Slipover by Ozetta. And so when Ozetta released that pattern, I really loved it. I really was interested in it. I think the color appealed to me specifically. So, you know, Ozetta is known to design in very neutral colors. And then I also loved the folded neckline on the pattern as well, and just the fit and the overall look. And I happen to have the Building Blocks Drop pattern already in my stash, and so or my pattern library, and so I decided to sort of take inspiration from the Highland Slipover and apply it to the Building Blocks Drop version that I made. And so this, as I scroll in here, or I zoom in, I should say, this is where you can see that I took some of that inspiration. First and foremost, I took that inspiration in terms of the color that I chose to use. For this particular version, I used Nutiden in the color Quartz, which is a really beautiful gray color. And in this particular version, you can see that I did actually go ahead and modify the pattern and create a folded over collar. And so this is actually a feature that is not part of the Building Blocks Drop original pattern. And so I chose to really just make that change. And to me, this gives me the feel of what I was looking for when I was really attracted to the Highland slipover pattern. So, you know, to do a folded over neckline, you really just, it's very simple. You simply just knit the double amount as you normally do, and then you either do a knit you knit the live stitches to your pickup stitches, or you actually bind off and then sew it down. In this instance, I chose to knit my stitches down to the cast on stitches. And so I got the same look and feel of what I was looking for in the Highland slipover with regard to the color and with regard to the folded over neckband, but without needing to buy that new pattern. Now, what I will say is when I saw the Highland slipover pattern, I did share it on socials. I did like the pattern on Ravelry. I shared it and, you know, and kind of commented, which is a big thing too on Instagram, to help the designer, you know, sort of get the visibility of their patterns out there. So I was able to support the designer in that way. Also, Ozetta is a designer that I have supported in other ways. So I've bought others of their patterns, and I've also test knit for Haley of Ozetta in the past as well. So there are other ways that I've supported the designer, but I can still knit something from a different designer that was heavily inspired by one of her designs. So that's kind of the real life example that I have already done that I wanted to show you all today. And then that all is going to bring me to my next Loving My Stash project, which I will go ahead and pull up for you all. And actually, just before I even do that, I'm going to go ahead and toggle to my library so that you all can see exactly what I mean when I say that I have a very, very large library of patterns. Or I guess actually I'll toggle to my library last. I will go ahead and search the pattern that I am looking for first so that you all can see the one that I am talking about. So specifically for this pattern, and the reason that I was searching for this pattern is I was actually not necessarily searching for a specific pattern or a specific feel or a specific anything. I think I talked about this in my first Loving My Stash episode or segment. Sometimes I start with the yarn in mind, and for this particular project that I had in mind, I have 3 different colors of a yarn that I will show you shortly, and I was looking for inspiration for a 3-color stripe pullover. And ultimately, you know, I saw a few different, you know, so I kind of, you know, went through my Ravelry search, and I searched for a top. I knew I wanted a pullover. I knew that I wanted it to be striped. And then I knew that I have fingering weight yarn. So those were essentially the 3 kind of search criteria that I had put into my Ravelry when I was searching for this. And then I scrolled through the various projects. You know, some of them had 2-color stripes, some of them had more than 3-color stripes, and so I kind of just went through the results until I found one that called to me. And the one that called to me was the Aimee by Petite Knit, and this is a pattern that was just recently released. I want to say in May, yes, in May of 2024, and it is a 3-colored striped tee, and as you can see, it's very simple. It is a crew neck, it is a raglan, and this is a look at the different stripes. So you have 2 thicker stripes, 1 thin stripe, and it gives you this kind of nautical feel. The edgings are worked in a 1x1 rib with a rolled edge. So you would essentially do your 1x1 rib and then knit for a few rounds straight before casting off knitwise, and that'll cause the knit fabric to roll over the ribbing. And yeah, so this is, you know, just a very basic tee pattern. And as I mentioned, like, there are tons of different raglan tee patterns. And so not that there's anything wrong with purchasing this pattern or not purchasing this pattern, especially if you don't already have a raglan tee pattern in your stash, but I already happen to have one. So that is what I'm going to do. In terms of the tee itself, just to give you details on Petite Knits version, it is available for 45 Danish kroner. It is using a fingering weight yarn. The gauge is 28 stitches. I'm going to be a completely different gauge, but I'll get to that. And then, you know, the kind of just goes into the description of the tee, which is a top down, you know, tee worked in stripes. Part of the yoke is worked flat back and forth to shape the neckline, and then joined in the round to knit the body. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and go back and actually go back to my notebook. And here we have my library. And so this is where I want to show you all kind of my very extensive library of patterns that I have. And, you know, so that you all can kind of see some of that. Some of these have either been patterns that I've purchased. Some of them are free patterns that I've, you know, saved to my Ravelry library. Some are patterns that I've, you know, been gifted as part of testing. And so I have a very, very, very extensive pattern collection. As you all can see, we can keep going forever and ever in my Ravelry library. And so, you know, just a lot of patterns. And yeah, and so this is kind of where I'm like, okay, well, that petite knit pattern is a very simple, again, crew neck raglan fingering weight t-shirt. Do I have a pattern in my stash that fits that bill? And I do. I'm going to go ahead and just search for it because I know that I passed it already, so that I can pull it up quickly. And this is the Coloring Book Tee by Aimee Sher. And so here we have it. So as you all can see, pulling it up, it is very, you know, it's hitting all of those things that I want. It is a crew neck. It has that raglan shaping. You know, it doesn't have the detail of like that rolled edge, but that's not necessarily something that is hit or miss for me in terms of how I want it. But, you know, this is something that, this is a pattern that I can take that I already have in my library and look at the features of the petite knit pattern that I like and apply it to this particular pattern. Also, because this is a designer that I knit their patterns over and over and over, I know my sizing block when it comes to Aimee's pattern, so I know how well it's going to fit. This particular pattern is a a compound raglan, so I know that it's going to fit me really well across the shoulders. I haven't checked the petite knit patterns, but I believe most of her patterns tend to be pretty just a straightforward raglan. But yeah, this is the pattern that I'm ultimately going to knit up. And so here you see this is available for $10.50 for purchase. Some of the suggested yarns are Pearl Soho Linen Quill and Knitting for Olive Pure Silk. It is a fingering weight garment. As you can see, the gauge is a little different. It is 24 stitches to 32 rows, but that's perfectly fine because what I'm looking for is more so that stripe pattern than it is the exact same gauge. I know that I'm going to get that gauge with this yarn that I'm going to use because it is yarn that I've already used and I've already gotten that gauge. And then you see more information about the pattern. You have the needle size, you have the various sizes, and let's go ahead and give you a little description of the tee itself. So the coloring book tee is a quintessential summer tee. This polished tee comes with a short row shaped neckline and different shaping and length options in the sleeves and body. Shaped with a beautiful compound raglan for a beautiful fit, this pattern is super easy to knit. So again, I will get some of that shaping detail from the petite knit pattern in this pattern, because Aimee does also have that short row shaping in the back of the neck. And as you can see, it comes in, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 sizes from 34 inches all the way up to 66 inches. And it's meant to be worn with a ease of 3 to 5 inches. And so, yeah, I will go ahead and stop that recording. And I kind of wanted to talk you through that process that I take sometimes of maybe I see one pattern and I want to, take those details and transpose it to another pattern that I already have. And I think I did talk about this a little bit in my knit and chat that I had around sort of the hype and marketing behind certain patterns, and a situation where I wasn't necessarily burned, but I definitely could have done this and I chose not to do it intentionally. I made that choice intentionally, and then ultimately I was like, well, why did I do that? I could have just used another pattern that I already had. And so, kind of in that same vein, I wanted to go ahead and do that this time around. Although this time around I'm kind of working backwards, because I started with the yarn and then ultimately I chose a pattern. So again, the next pattern that I will be knitting as part of the Loving My Stash series is going to be the coloring book tee by Aimee Sher. And the yarn that I'm going to use, I have right here, and actually I have one of them back here, is all of my leftover woolly knit cones in the 4-ply cotton. And so that's kind of where you all now can see where I was going with this and why I specifically wanted 3 color stripes. It's because I have 3 colors of the 4-ply cotton. And so this is an order that I placed together. I placed all 3 of these together. I want to say in 2021 or 2022. So I've had these in my stash for a while, and I actually used these 2 together. And so this is, I want to say the color is cream, and then the blue is called navy. And so I used these 2 together in a project where I held both of them double. It was a DK weight project, and I made a summer drop shoulder tee called Parnell, which is a free pattern by Barocco Design Studio. And so I will link you to my Ravelry project page for that. And then I have about 100 grams left of the white, and then I don't remember how many grams I have left of the navy. I would have to reweigh it, but I only used about 100 grams of the navy, and these are 400 gram cones. So I still had quite a bit of the navy left over. Then ultimately I used just the navy to knit my recent spring line tee by Samantha Guerin, and that was a drop shoulder summer tee with a lace pattern down the sides. And so I used this one to knit that just on its own, and so I still have quite a bit left over. I still think I have and I apologize, I have like mohair on my face, but I think I have about 100 grams left now that I have made the other 2 projects. And then this is the cone that I used for my oolong tank that you all just saw. And as you can see, I have a lot left of this one. So I think I used about 150 grams for the oolong tank. So I still have quite a bit of this one. So this is going to be my main color that I use. And then the blue is going to be the thicker stripes, I'm thinking. I haven't decided. I'm either gonna make the blue the thicker stripes or the white the thicker stripes, so we'll see. But one of these, the blue and the white, will be the thicker stripes, and the other one will be the thinner stripes. I'll probably weigh it out just to see which one I have more, because I'll probably be playing yarn chicken when it comes to that part. But I should definitely have plenty of the mustard color to make the tee. And so, yeah, I think that's, you know, and that's kind of where I was going, where earlier I mentioned, like, would you all be interested to see kind of a video like that? So essentially, out of these 3 cones, once I finish the coloring book tee, I will have gotten 4 garments out of them. So, and I'll probably still have some more of the mustard left over once we're all said and done with all of that. So, yeah, I think that, you know, that's kind of a way that we can love our stash in a different way. So not only our yarn stash, but our library of patterns that we have amassed over the years throughout our knitting. So now we get to the last 2 segments of the podcast where I share my knitting plans as well as the numbers with you all. So for the month of August, I don't have too many knitting plans. Again, I think as I mentioned in my last podcast episode, I'm trying not to be too hard on myself when it comes to my knitting, although I do know that I finished 3 projects very quickly. It's not because I was necessarily pushing myself to finish them in a certain amount of time, although 2 of them are the test knit, but the test knit isn't due until mid-September, I want to say. So it just happened to be that I just had all of that knitting time, and so I was able to make progress on those. So for this month, I do have a sample that has come in. So the yarn for a sample, I should say, that has come in from Barocco. So I will be knitting a sample for the spring summer collection for 2025. So that definitely has to be finished this month because it has to go out to Barocco right after Labor Day. So that is my one and only project that I plan on finishing this month. And then I am hoping to finish the body on my book club cardigan, because I think that my book club cardigan is going to be my Rhinebeck sweater for this year. So really excited about that. And I think I mentioned that I'm doing like a little bit of a mini cal with a few of my close friends, and some of us are going to Rhinebeck, so we're gonna get together and, you know, have our cardigans together and take some pictures. So really excited about that. So last and definitely not least, I have the numbers for the month. And as always, I will have my sort of graphic that I have here on the side so you all can read along with the numbers as I talk about them. And so the numbers are as follows. As a reminder, the out category or the in category is going to be any yarn that I've purchased or destashed. So if I've purchased the yarn, it's going to be a positive into the in. If I've destashed, it's going to be a negative into the in. And the out category is only yarn that has been knit up. And so that yarn, and I only count it once I'm completely finished with the project. So for instance, even though like I finished the body of the book club cardigan, I wouldn't do those numbers until I'm fully done with the cardigan. And then I count those numbers in the stash down numbers. So pulling those numbers up so I can read them to you all. For the month of July in the in category, and I didn't have any destash yarn, so this is only yarn that was purchased, and this was actually the KFO merino and soft silk, so that was the only purchase that I had this month. And so in the in category, we have 2,595 yards coming into my stash. And in the out category, again, I have the Oolong Tank, the Avani, and then the 2 Hibernate pullovers. I had 4,666 yards going out, and that's giving me a negative of 2,071 yards for the month. So looking at the year-to-date totals, the total in, and I don't believe I've destashed any yarn this year at all. So this is only yarn that has come into my stash. And again, I am purchasing yarn usually as souvenirs, or if it's a knitting festival, or again, in some cases, I've had either gifted yarn or yarn that I'm purchasing for a specific test knit like this one. Although I'm trying to keep that part of the purchasing a little bit down, but I've had 2 projects that have had sponsored yarn, or 3 projects actually that I've had sponsored yarn for this year. So the total in is 11,427 yards, and the total number of yards that I've knit up so far this year is 13,556 yards. So I am at a year-to-date negative of 2,129 yards. So really excited to have a negative number going into flock. And that was kind of my goal, I think, going into each festival is having like somewhere near a 0 or negative, so that I can also kind of just think about maybe how much yarn I want to bring into my stash. If we are completely honest, I have not sat down and made my list for flock yet. So I do need to do that this weekend because we leave in 3 days, or 4 days, I should say. So I do need to sit down and do that. Although I honestly don't have like too many yarn vendors that I necessarily want to hit up. I do have a lot of like notions vendors and stuff like that that I want to hit up. So I'm really excited for that. So we'll see how much yarn I end up bringing into my stash at the end of flock, because, you know, as we all know, famous last words. But I do have quite a few things that I want to buy in terms of like stitch markers and maybe some project bags and things like that. And flock for me, I think, is more so of a, it's going to be more of a social experience for me, just seeing some of my friends that I haven't seen in a while, since Rhinebeck, most of them, or, you know, kind of just going out there. And then my husband and I are actually making a really big trip of it. So I guess that leads us into kind of a little bit of the outro and what to expect from me next. So the second video this month is going to be a vlog. So if you're not into those, you can definitely come back in the next month's podcast, which will be up, I think, Labor Day weekend. But yeah, I am planning on vlogging while I'm at flock. And so we are flying into Seattle on Wednesday morning, and we'll have 3 full days. I have not planned on taking any classes on the Friday, so we will do the 2 days of the marketplace. I did purchase tickets to the sort of garden party on the Saturday, so really excited about that. And then we leave Seattle bright and early on Monday morning, and we are heading up to Port Angeles, and we are going to spend 3 days in Port Angeles, just hiking Olympic National Park and getting to know the area around there. So my husband and I are actually very big and avid hikers, so I'm really excited to get to hit up another national park. And this is our second national park that we will have gone to together as a couple, and so I think that that's kind of our new goal, is as a couple we want to hit up all of the national parks. So really excited about that, and just have 3 days in nature. Work has been very stressful recently, and if you remember from the last podcast, if you've caught that, I will be starting school in just a couple of weeks. So actually right after Labor Day, school starts. I'll be taking 2 classes this semester. And yeah, so I'm really looking forward to those 3 days, especially after being around a lot of people, to just decompress and get out in nature before we head back home. And then I have like another day or 2 before I have to head back to work and start the hubbub all over again. So that is what you can expect from me later this month. I can't guarantee that the video will be up in 2 weeks, which would technically just give me a few days to edit the vlog. So I think that, you know, my vlogs, I do tend to take a long time to edit a vlog. So it might be 3 weeks before you see a video from me, but definitely there will be a second video in August. And then I will see you for the next podcast episode, which will drop on Labor Day weekend, Sunday, as usual. So if you've made it this far, thank you so much for sticking around with me and for continuing to come back. This is just a reminder to do all the podcasty things. You know, make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already. Hit that like button. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you've been working on, what your plans are for the rest of the month to work on while you were watching this. And then, of course, as always, there are a few different ways that you can support the channel as well, either by buying a Ravelry pattern or by, you know, supporting monetarily through Ko-Fi if you should choose, but just liking and commenting and engaging with these videos is enough. And I will leave you here until the next time when I have a sit down video with you all in September. I hope that you are taking care of yourselves, your loved ones, and each other, and I'll see you next time. Bye.